I remember the time when I perceived myself as an unluckiest fellow, filled with weakness and incompetencies. And today, as I reflect the chapter of my weakness, I have come to this realization that weakness is actually a beautiful and adventurous aspect of life. So today, my dear friends, all we're going to do is we are going to understand more about our own loopholes so that we can build our own strategy to become better than who we are right now. Weakness, something that can take people to their worst and something that can take people to their best. And the first question that we need to ask to ourselves, what is the mother of weakness? And my dear friends, let me tell you this. In the world we live in today, most of the judgments, they are established on the basis of comparison. And even in the case of weakness, the creation of weakness happens when we compare someone with someone else, something with something else, or let's say when we compare someone or something with some other reference point. And if there is no comparison, there is nothing such as weakness or strength at all. As for example, if we say this student is weak in one subject, somehow we are comparing this student with some other reference point. And this idea of comparing ourselves with some other reference point is not a bad idea, especially when we use it wisely. I mean, when we compare ourselves with some other reference point, somehow we are discovering our own loopholes. And this also allows us to identify the rooms on which we can actually improvise. This allows us to identify loopholes through which we can excel towards our definition of masterpiece. Now, my dear friends, to further know about our loopholes, we will need to classify our weaknesses into three major classifications. And this idea of categorizing our loopholes, our weaknesses into three categories, it popped down into my head when I was deeply thinking about the psychology of weakness. And this idea of categorizing our own loopholes, it helped me to improvise on my weaknesses in no time. I mean, it simply allowed me to change my perspective towards my weaknesses. So my dear friends, let me offer to you the three very basic, effective, and major classification of weakness. The first classification of weakness, the weakness to be ignored. The first classification of weakness is what I call the weakness to be ignored. Now, these are the kind of weaknesses that does not really affect our quality of life. These are the kind of weaknesses that does not really affect our core competency. Now, if I'm weak about the topic of nuclear power, it does not affect my core competency, isn't it? If there's a singer who is weak about the topic of calculus or derivatives, it does not influence his quality of voice. If an organizational leader is weak about the skill of accountancy, he or she can hire someone else instead of focusing on that particular area of personal weakness. So my dear friends, these are the weaknesses that we can simply ignore. So one thing we must understand is, you don't really need to be perfect, isn't it? Some of the most beautiful things in this world, they are not perfect. And no matter how hard you try, there will always be millions of areas in our life on which we will not be able to be strong about. And maybe we do not really need to be, isn't it? But today, my dear friends, most of the young people, they keep telling to themselves, maybe they don't look good enough, they don't have good bike, they don't have good height, or in other words, they keep worrying so much about things for which they can actually worry the least. So the bottom line is, number one, if the weakness is not directly in your control, maybe that's the weakness to be ignored. If the weakness is not really relevant for your goal, for your objective, for your purpose, maybe that's the weakness to be ignored. Point number three, if the weakness is not really affecting your core competency, that's the weakness to be ignored. And point number four, if the weakness is not really affecting your quality of life, maybe that's the weakness to be ignored. The second classification of weakness, the weakness to be changed. Now, these are the kind of weaknesses that block you from achieving your higher potential. These are the kind of weaknesses that do not allow you to gear up towards your goal. Therefore, these are the weaknesses to be changed. Now, as for example, if you are an organizational leader and one of your major weakness is communication skill, then probably that's the weakness to be changed. If you are a sports person and your body is not very flexible, probably that's the weakness to be changed. If you are emotional fool, you are aggressive, you are passive, you cannot really handle criticisms, you are egoistic, you have limited belief system, and you love your comfort zone, and these characteristics are not really allowing you to march up towards your definition of masterpiece, then these are the weaknesses to be changed. Now, my dear friends, when you decrease this kind of weaknesses, you begin to increase the intensity of your core strength. When you begin to work on this kind of weaknesses, you begin to amplify your level of performance. So my dear friends, it's high time for you to identify if this particular weakness is the weakness that must be changed. If this particular weakness is blocking you from reaching to your higher potential. And if the answer is yes, it is blocking me from improvising myself. If the answer is yes, it's high time for you to go and work on it. It's high time for you to go and change it. Because once you change it, maybe the game of your life is going to change. Once you change it, maybe you will be able to run towards your goals. Maybe you'll be able to run towards your definition of your ultimate potential, because these are not the weaknesses to be ignored. These are the weaknesses for you to go and work on. These are the weaknesses for you to go and change. The third classification of weakness, the weakness to be redefined. Now these weaknesses are the tigers wearing the skin of a sheep. They look like your weakness, but they have the potential to be your leading strength. All you gotta do is you simply got to change your perspective towards these weaknesses. You simply got to redefine these weaknesses, and these weaknesses will actually flip into one of your leading strengths. Now in my case, my dear friends, now I'm a fast speaker, especially when I'm on the stage. Sometimes I really go very fast, and one thing that most of the people have told me is, Saunak, you speak very fast and that's your major weakness. But one thing I did, yes, I worked on that area of weakness, but one more thing that I really did was I redefined my weakness. And what I did was I made the same weakness as one of my unique selling point. Now there are millions of people in this world who have been told you cannot walk like others, you cannot do like others, you cannot see like others, you cannot behave like others, but they have used their same weakness to give a new definition of possibility into this world. They have used their same weakness to redefine their weakness and give a new shape of height of possibility to this world. Now there are people who have been told you have very poor singing voice, but they have used their same poor voice, same so-called poor singing voice, to be viral singers. Even the weakness of overthinking, when used effectively, has given rise to great scientists and philosophers. Even people with the weakness of laziness have used their same weakness to be creative thinkers. So the interesting thing is, you do not really need to ignore this kind of weaknesses. You do not really need to change these weaknesses. All you can do is simply change your perspective about this weakness, and these weaknesses will change, will flip into one of your leading strengths. So today is a high time for you to go and change your perspective about your weaknesses. My dear friends, I want to appeal you to go ahead, open up your diary and start writing down all the things which you believe are your weaknesses. And the first thing you gotta do is ask yourself, what kind of comparison has given rise to these individual weaknesses? And the second thing that you gotta do is classify these weaknesses into these three major categories: the weakness to be ignored, the weakness to be changed, and weakness to be redefined. And once you've done it, write down your new perspective about your weaknesses and make an action plan about how you're going to ignore it, how you're going to change it, how you're going to redefine it. And if this innovation helps you, go ahead and maybe talk about this idea with 10 other people. This is how you help them, and this is how you also begin to understand the concept even more. My dear friends, I wish you all the very best, and I'm really looking forward to see you improvising on your loopholes. Transform yourself, strive towards excellence. I'll see you again.